we're in Isaiah chapter 34, and what I want us to do is to do a little bit of history and study on a particular nation that we're going to start talking about. But when we look at chapter 34 and we look at chapter 35, I put it up on the screen here, but we really have a comparison. Chapter 34, those who were hostile to God's will and purposes, they're going to suffer defeat. And then chapter 35, we have God's people would be redeemed and rejoice. So when we go through these two chapters, we're comparing the results of God's judgment of the nations. And we've been talking about several different nations anyway as we've gone through the book of Isaiah up to this point. So today, as we get started, when we look at chapter 34 and we look at verse 8, it says, "For it is the day of the Lord's vengeance and the year of recompenses for the controversy of Zion." So, actually, I meant to say chapter 35, verse 8. I'm sorry. Chapter 35, verse 8 says, "And an highway shall be there, and a way, and it shall be called the way of holiness. The unclean shall not pass over it, but it shall be for those, the wayfaring men, though fools shall not err therein." So, sorry about that. I was reading both chapters this morning, and I was indeed looking at 34 verse 8, but that'll be a little later on. So, an highway, also known as the way of holiness. So, Isaiah says the faithful would walk in security on this highway of holiness. And this is the same message we've been doing or reading about anyway throughout Isaiah, the remnant, the faithful remnant. They're going to be secure, they're going to be protected, they're going to be victorious in the end. Those who are going against and erring against the will of God, they're going to be defeated. They're going to be destroyed. They're going to experience the heartburn and all the bad things in life of being punished and facing your consequences. That's what's going to happen to the erring. So through their obedience on this highway of holiness, through their obedience, they would be able to experience the salvation of the Lord. So that's the comparison that we're going to be going through here as we look at chapters 34 and 35. They're going to connect together, and together we're going to be able to get the overall lesson and application of what Isaiah is talking about here. So, an highway, the way of holiness. And when you go into this chapter, we have a certain people who are going to be talked about. So we're going to be talking about Edom. And I got a map here. It's not the greatest. Actually, I couldn't find very good maps of Edom. But as you can see here in the white outline, it gives you a general idea of the land of Edom. So these are going to be the people that we're talking about. And when we look at this in chapter 34 and verse 5, it says, "For my sword shall be bathed in heaven. Behold, it shall come down upon Idumea." How would you pronounce that? Anybody?
It's called Idumea.
Idumea. So, "and upon the people of my curse to judgment." So first off, and I've pretty much given it away, who are we talking about here when we're looking at this Idumea? Who does this refer to? Edom. Very good. It equals Edom. So we're talking about the people of Edom here. So when you think about Edom, and you think about all the accounts that we can read about through the Bible with Edom and their relationship with Israel, we read that it's really not that good of a relationship between the two. The enemy of Judah, representing the nations who were hostile to God and His people, in this chapter 34, Edom is being picked to basically portray that enemy of God's people, the enemy of Judah. This would be a nation who were hostile to His people. And we're going to read a little bit later about how they refused to let them pass through the land so that they can get to the promised land. There wasn't a lot of love there when it came to Edom and God's people. So, question. Who did Edom, the Edomites, who did they descend from? Esau. Okay, very good. So, one of the accounts we can read is going to be in Numbers chapter 20, if we can turn there real quick. In Numbers chapter 20, starting in verse 14. So would someone want to read Numbers chapter 20, 14 through, let's just make it 22?
I'll read.
Okay.
And Moses sent messengers from Kadesh to the king of Edom. And to the king of Edom, thus saith thy brother Israel, thou knowest all the travel that hath befallen us, how our fathers went down into Egypt, and we had dwelt in Egypt a long time, and the Egyptians vexed us and our fathers. And when we cried unto the Lord, the Lord hath brought us forth out of Egypt, and behold, we are in Kadesh, the city of most of thy border. Let us pass, I pray thee, through thy country. We will not pass through the fields or through the vineyards, neither will we drink of the water or the well. We will go by the clean highway. We will not turn to the right hand or to the left until we have passed thy border. And Edom said unto him, Thou shalt not pass by me, lest I come out against thee with the sword. And the children of Israel said unto him, We will go by the highway, and if I and my cattle drink of thy water, then I will pay for it. I will only, without doing anything else, go through on my feet. And he said, Thou shalt not go through. And Edom came out against him with much people and with a strong hand. Thus Edom refused to give Israel passage through his border. Wherefore Israel turned away from him, and the children of Israel, even the whole congregation, journeyed from Kadesh and came unto Mount Hor. So
as Clark read that, did you guys pick up on what one of the main things that was taking place at Edom and how they were treating God's people? What was the thing that they were doing to God's people? What were they guilty of in what Clark just read?
With the strong hand.
Well, let's look at verse 18. So they're trying to get somewhere. And Edom said unto him, Thou shalt not pass by me, lest I come out against thee with a sword. That's right. So they wouldn't let them pass through to get to the land that they were trying to get to. And in verse 21, it says, Thus Edom refused to give Israel passage through this border. Wherefore Israel turned away from him. So there was some hostility there. Edom did not want them to pass through their land. They didn't like them. And they pretty much said, if you come through our land, you better be ready. We're going to come out with a sword. We don't want you through our land. So, maybe a little deeper background here as far as Edom is concerned. We can go back and look at Deuteronomy 23. Let's look at Deuteronomy 23. And let's just get a little better understanding as to, Edom and the Edomites. Let's see, Deuteronomy 23, verse 7. So this goes along with whoever answered Esau being the one that they basically descended from. It says, let's see, thou shalt not abhor the Edomite, for he is thy brother. Thou shalt not abhor an Egyptian, because thou wast a stranger in his land. So we have it being talked about, the Edomites, and we have it phrased as his brother. So when we think of Jacob, so who was the people or descendants that would have come under Jacob? Okay.
So Esau, he liked his brother over too.
That's right. Yeah.
So it's naturally his people are going to be the same way. They're not going to like him.
Yeah, that's right.
They're going to have nothing to do with it, because their family's birthright was tricked and stolen. Well, he really gave it away. You look at it like Jacob stole it.
Yeah, like he got tricked and it was taken away from him. Yeah. So between those things, I mean, we have some hostility that was building from the beginning here between these two people, these brothers, and then the people that they were over, like you said, Clark. You got the Edomites and you got the Israelites. Exactly. I mean, they didn't even want them to pass through the land, just like you just read. We're going to come out with our swords if we see you coming through our land. That's right. So we're looking at that. We're getting some history here. Genesis 32:28 gives us a little better idea as far as Jacob and Esau. Let's see here. Genesis chapter 32. And let's see here. I think it's more than just that verse. See, verse 28 says, and he said, thy name shall be called no more Jacob, but Israel, for as a prince thou hast power with God, and with men hast prevailed. And let's see here. Most likely I wrote down the wrong verses of what I had in mind. Yeah, the whole chapter 32, I was trying to just pick up on a few verses here without having to actually read the entire thing. Verse 13, he lodged there the same night, took of that which came to his hand a present for Esau his brother. I guess basically the whole chapter we're getting.
You know, verse 6 is kind of like what we were just reading, kind of.
What do we got there, Clark?
And the message returned to Jacob, saying, we came to thy brother Esau, and also he cometh to meet thee, and 400 men with him. He come out with a gang of people to meet his brother. He couldn't meet him one-to-one.
That's right. And Jacob was greatly afraid and distressed. What do we got there, Penny? Hold on, I'm almost there. 27 verse what?
41.
Esau hated Jacob, because of the blessing wherewith his father blessed him. Esau said in his heart, the days of mourning for my father are at hand. Then will I slay my brother Jacob. So you've got the two founders, like you said, Clark. You've got Jacob and Esau being brothers, and there was some hatred here. Esau hated his brother. And just like any leader, if you got people under you, those people are going to follow those same viewpoints as what you follow.
Makes you think about Cain and Abel.
Cain and Abel, that's right. So we do have some bad history here. And we've already read Genesis 32, verse 6, as far as the confrontations and the hostility. So here we are in Isaiah chapter 34, and Edom is being picked as that example among all nations of how when you go against God's will and you go against God's people, then you're going to face a judgment. You're going to have to answer for the consequences of your bad behavior. Wouldn't even let them pass through the land. So the hostility here is clear. The hostility became a pattern throughout the next few centuries. As we read through the Bible, there's multiple accounts of the Edomites and the Israelites not getting along. The Edomites didn't like them, and there's several other occasions that talk about that. So this is the pattern. And as a result of all this hostility, here we are in Isaiah chapter 34, and we're discussing a judgment. Edom would be judged along with all the other enemies of Judah. They're not going to escape it. And that's what we're going to get into today. So when we look at this, and some of this we've already read, but I put it up here just in case you wanted to take some notes. You know, Edom got its name from Esau, the brother of Jacob, and that's recorded in Genesis chapter 36 and verse 8. You know, Edom denied permission for the children of Israel to pass through their territory as they were trying to make their way to the promised land. They said, if you come through our territory, we're going to come out with swords. There's going to be a fight on your hands. We don't want to see you going through our land. You know, we don't like you. We hate you. Even King Saul fought against them. So if we turn to 1 Samuel 14:47, we can see that this hostility continued throughout years after this. After Esau hated his brother back in Genesis, the hostility continued on. 1 Samuel 14. And again, I'm trying to keep the scripture readings short, so I'm just trying to pick out some key verses. 1 Samuel 14:47. It says, so Saul took the kingdom over Israel and fought against all his enemies on every side, against Moab, against the children of Ammon, and against Edom, and against the kings of Zobah, and against the Philistines, and whithersoever he turned himself, he vexed them. Edom was put in the same category as the Philistines, in which we've read all kinds of stuff about the Philistines. But they were a known enemy to God's people. And here we are, many years removed from what happened in Genesis and what happened in Numbers, and it's still the same pattern. King David, you know, he subdued them in 2 Samuel 8:14. Even David was dealing with them. So if we go to 2 Samuel chapter 8, in verse 14, it says, and he put garrisons in Edom. Throughout all Edom put he garrisons, and all they of Edom became David's servants. And the Lord preserved David whithersoever he went. David was still dealing with the Edomites. That bad blood just kept continuing on between brother and brother, between nation and nation. Edom was considered an enemy, and we could see that in 1 Kings chapter 11 and verse 14. And the Lord stirred up an adversary unto Solomon, Hadad the Edomite. He was of the king's seed in Edom. So even all the way through the book of Kings, here we have Edom being known as one of those enemies, one of those who were just hostile toward the people of Israel. And that's the pattern that they chose to go. So the Edomites, actually, when you look at Psalm 137 and verse 7, you'll even see that they rejoice and sing in happiness at the thought of the destruction of Jerusalem. So let's see here. Let's turn to Psalms 137. So in Psalm 137, when you get down to verse 7, it says, "Remember, O Lord, the children of Edom in that day of Jerusalem, who said, raise it, even to the foundation thereof." The children of Edom and their hearts towards Jerusalem and towards the destruction and all of what was taking place, they were happy. They were sitting back saying, man, look at that. They're just getting what they deserve. And they could care less about what was happening to the people in Jerusalem. Matter of fact, one of the things you'll read in Obadiah is when the people were trying to escape, guess what? The Edomites were there to basically try to stop them. There was no love for the Edomites with the Israelites. They didn't like them. Edom's violence is noted. So when you go to Joel, we can see, and what I'm doing here is I'm painting a picture of the Edomites so that we can see that they were not a nice people. They did not like the Israelites. So let's see here. In Joel chapter 3, if I can ever make it there. Okay. In Joel chapter 3, let's see here. And it shall come to pass, did I not put down the right verses that I wanted to read? Which one was it, Clark?
I got Joel 3:19 says, Egypt shall be a desolation, and Edom shall be a
I even had it on the screen. So as you can see, I'm as blind as a bat sometimes. So yeah, so we can see here the violence of the history of the Edomites, what they're known for. Just like you said, for the violence against the children of Judah. You know, they were known for that. Joel recorded that. In the book of Amos, it's recorded again. So if we go to the book of Amos in chapter 1, this time I'll actually go by my notes here. So Amos chapter 1, we have, let's start in verse, let's just start in verse 11. Thus saith the Lord, for 3 transgressions of Edom, and for 4, I will not turn away the punishment thereof, because he did pursue his brother with the sword. He did cast off all pity. His anger did tear perpetually, and he kept his wrath forever. But I will send a fire upon Teman, which shall devour the palaces of Bozrah. Thus saith the Lord, for 3 transgressions of the children of Ammon, and for 4, I will not turn away the punishment thereof, because they have ripped up the women with child of Gilead, that they might enlarge their border. Violence and wickedness and hatred, the Edomites did not like the Israelites, and all this hatred started back between 2 brothers, Jacob and Esau, and it just continued. Were you going to say something, Clark?
I kind of think about the Hatfields and the McCalls, it kind of sounds the same.
Yeah, you know, it sure does.
They keep that feud going.
It sure does. No, you're right. And there's all kinds of families that go down this path.
But still got some of the feud today.
Yeah.
Because it's passed down from generation to generation.
So we have the recordance of the violence and their hatred, and we also have it recorded of the destruction that they were going to face. So we can look at, I don't know if we want to look at all these. I guess we could. Let's go to Jeremiah chapter 49. So Jeremiah chapter 49, starting in verse 7 through verse 22. All right, who wants to do a lengthy reading? I can do it, but it's probably going to take me twice as long as one of you to do it. Anybody? You'll do it?
Concerning Edom, thus saith the Lord of hosts, wisdom no more in Edom, his counsel perished from the truth, is their wisdom vanished. Flee, turn back, dwell deep, O inhabitants of Edom, for I will bring the calamity of Esau upon him, the time that I will visit him. If grape gatherers come to thee, will they not leave some bleeding grapes? If these by night, will they destroy till they have enough? But I have made Esau bare, I have uncovered his secret places, and he shall not be able to hide himself. His seed is full, and his brethren, and his neighbors, and he is not. Lead thy fatherless children, I will preserve them alive, and let thy widows trust in me. For thus saith the Lord, behold, they whose judgment was not presented the cup, and assuredly drunken. And art thou he that shall altogether go unpunished? Thou shalt not go unpunished, but thou shalt surely drink of it. For I have sworn by myself, saith the Lord, that Basra shall become a desolation, a reproach, a waste, and a curse, and all the cities thereof shall be perpetual wastes. I have heard a rumor from the Lord, and have an ambassador sent unto the heathen, saying, gather ye together, and come against her, and rise up to the battle. For lo, I will make thee small among the heathen, and despised among men. Thy terribleness hath deceived thee, in the pride of thine heart. And thou that dwellest in the cleft of the rock, that holdest the height of the hill, where thou shouldest make thy nest as high as the eagle. I will bring thee down from thence, saith the Lord. Also Edom shall be a desolation, every one that goeth by it shall be astonished, and shall hiss at them, at all the plagues thereof, as in the overthrow of Sodom and Gomorrah, and the neighboring cities thereof, saith the Lord. No man shall abide there, neither shall the Son of Man dwell in it. Behold, he shall come up like a lion from the swelling of Jordan against the habitation of the strong. But I will suddenly make him run away from her. And who is the chosen man that I may appoint over her? Or who is like me, and who will appoint me the time, and who is that shepherd in the field? Therefore hear the voice of the Lord, that he has taken me in his purposes, and will purpose against the inhabitants of Edom. Surely the least of the flock shall draw them out. Surely he shall make their habitation desolate with them. The earth is moved at the noise of their fall, as the cry of the noise thereof was heard in the Red Sea. Behold, he shall come up and fly as the eagle, and spread his wings over Basra. And at that day shall the heart of the mighty men of Edom be as the heart of a woman in her pains.
All right, I appreciate that, Mark. You know, as you're reading through that in verse 18, as in the overthrow of Sodom and Gomorrah, you know, the judgment that these folks were going to face was in comparison to that of Sodom and Gomorrah. It was not going to be good. And we'll touch on that when we get over into verses 5 through 7 in Isaiah chapter 34. But the judgment wasn't going to be good. They're warned about their behavior. You know, Ezekiel did the same thing. He warned them, or has warnings that the people were going to face in Edom. Ezekiel chapter 25. And let's see here. In verse 12, it says, verse 11, "And I will execute judgments upon Moab, and they shall know that I am the Lord. Thus saith the Lord, because that Edom hath dealt against the house of Judah by taking vengeance, and hath greatly offended and revenged himself upon them. Therefore thus saith the Lord God, I will also stretch out my hand upon Edom. I will cut off the man and the beast from it. I will make it desolate from Teman, and they of Dedan shall fall by the sword. And I will lay my vengeance upon Edom by the hand of my people Israel, and they shall do in Edom according to my anger and according to my fury, and they shall know my vengeance, saith the Lord God." You know, when you read that in verse 13, it really goes hand in hand with some descriptions that we're about to get into in Isaiah chapter 34. In Isaiah chapter 34, it says, "Therefore thus saith the Lord God, I will stretch out my hand upon Edom and will cut off man and beast from it." You know, I'm going to wipe it out. It says it's going to be desolate. It's going to fall by the sword. And those are the things we're going to get into as we dive into Isaiah chapter 34. These judgments that are going to take place with Edom. So Obadiah, verse 8, same thing. Malachi chapter 1, verse 4. You know, Edom's destruction being discussed because of their wickedness and misbehavior, their lack of obedience. So here we go. We're going to actually start the chapter now, because I would like to get through this whole chapter in a discussion. We've already done the background of the Edomites and their behavior and their attitude, and why they would even be one of the ones being talked about as the nations are going to be judged. So God's sword will descend for judgment. So that's what we're talking about here. We're talking about judgment taking place for bad behavior. It says in verse 1, "Come near, ye nations, to hear and hearken, ye people. Let the earth hear and all that is therein, the world and all things that come forth of it. For the indignation of the Lord is upon all nations, and his fury upon all their armies. He hath utterly destroyed them. He hath delivered them to the slaughter. Their slain also shall be cast out. Their stink shall come up out of their carcasses, and the mountains shall be melted with their blood. For all the host of heaven shall be dissolved, and the heavens shall be rolled together as a scroll, and all their hosts shall fall down, as the leaf falleth from the vine, and as a falling fig from a fig tree." So, we went through, about a year or so ago, some pretty in-depth studies of judgments taking place. So I want to ask the question here, when you guys read this, does this speak any similarities of maybe some other judgments that are recorded in the Bible? Well, Peter talked about the final judgment
Then you got Sodom and Gomorrah.
You've got Sodom and Gomorrah. There's one that stands out to me when I read verse 3. Their slain also shall be cast out. Their stink shall come up of their carcasses. The mountains shall be melted with their blood. And basically, it's a picture of, for those who are guilty, there's not going to be any escape. And I couldn't help but think about Matthew chapter 24, when the warning for the destruction of Jerusalem came about, and how, Christ gave them the warning of when this comes, the Romans were going to be used as the judgment tool here, and there's not going to be any escape for you guys. You've been disobedient. You're not going to escape it. So if we want to turn over to Matthew chapter 24, and we're talking about judgment language, in which, like you said, Clark, we even have this being talked about in Sodom and Gomorrah also, of their destruction. But here we have in Matthew 24, we're talking about the destruction of Jerusalem. And let's see here. I'm just trying to think of a good place to start as it's being described of the signs and the warnings. And it may be verse 16. Christ has given them the signs. It says, "Then let them which be in Judea flee into the mountains. Let him which is also in the housetop not come down to take anything out of his house." There's no point in it. "Neither let him which is in the field return back to take his clothes." There's not going to be any point in it. "And woe unto them that are with child, and to them that give a suck in those days. But I pray ye that your flight be not in the winter, neither on the Sabbath day." So we had discussed before, you better pray that this isn't going to come on the Sabbath day, because when you look at history, what happens on the Sabbath day with the city? What do? They'd lock the gates. They'd be stuck. So you better hope it's not on the Sabbath day, for then shall great tribulation, such as was not seen since the beginning of the world to this time, no, not ever shall be. And except those days should be shortened, there should no flesh be saved. For the elect's sake, those days shall be shortened. So it was going to be of such a destruction that Christ even says in verse 23, "For if any man say unto you, Lo, here is Christ, or there, believe it not." In other words, it was going to be such a destruction that they were going to try to say, this has got to be the end. This has got to be what was taught about. The end of the world has now come, but Jesus is saying, don't be listening to these people. There's going to be false prophets arising and false Christs, and shall show great signs and wonders, insomuch, if it were possible, they're going to try to deceive the very elect. Behold, I have told you before. Wherefore, if they shall say unto you, Behold, he is in the desert, go not forth. Behold, he is in the secret chambers, believe it not. For as the lightning cometh out of the east, and shineth even to the west, so shall also the coming of the Son of Man be. In other words, Jesus is saying, when I come, when we talk about what Peter taught Clark about the end of the world, he says you're going to know it. You're going to see it. It's not going to be what we're discussing here of the destruction of Jerusalem. So we had this great judgment being discussed here in Matthew 24. We have a great judgment being discussed here as these nations are going to face the consequences. Edom is going to face the consequences. And it's going to be absolutely terrible because they would not go with the will of God. But they followed other nations and they followed their own wisdom. So now they will pay for that. They will be judged by God's sword. You know, as we look at the next several verses here, it's going to be verses 5 through 15. I want us to look at some of the things being talked about. It says, "For my sword shall be bathed in heaven. Behold, it shall come down upon Idumea." I'm pretty sure we're not pronouncing that correctly, but that's Edom. "And upon the people of my curse to judgment. The sword of the Lord is filled with blood. It is made fat with fatness, and with the blood of lambs and goats, with the fat of the kidneys of the rams. For the Lord has sacrifice in Bozrah, and great slaughter in the land of Idumea. And the unicorn shall come down with them, and the bullocks with the bulls, and their land shall be soaked with blood, and their dust made fat with fatness." So, when we're looking at these verses, this is I guess a trivia question here. Does anyone know what Bozrah? What is Bozrah? What was the place of Bozrah? Because it's good that we know these places, because it tells us who we're talking about here. And Bozrah plays some significance. And you know, as you think about that, and we read here in verse 6, you know, the sword of the Lord is filled with blood, you know, the fat with fatness, the blood of the lambs and goats, and the kidneys and rams. You know, you think about that, you think about the priests and their sacrifices and what was all involved in sacrificing these lambs and rams and goats. And basically they're saying all the blood that you would see in those sacrifices, that's the kind of blood that you're going to see in this land. And we have this, the Lord hath a sacrifice in Bozrah. So where is Bozrah? Okay. Bozrah is the capital of Edom. That's why it's significant. It's the capital of Edom. So this is their capital. And it says, "And the unicorn shall come down with them, and the bullocks with the bulls. Their land shall be soaked with blood, their dust made fat with fatness." And it says in verse 8, "For it is the day of the Lord's vengeance, and the year of recompenses for the controversy of Zion. And the streams thereof shall be turned into pitch, and the dust thereof into brimstone, and the land thereof shall become burning pitch. It shall not be quenched night or day. The smoke thereof shall go up forever, and generation to generation it shall lie waste. None shall pass through it forever and ever." So, as we go through these verses, basically a picture of judgment, a picture of owning up and answering to the consequences is being pictured here. This is what's being described. They're going to face something pretty terrible for their hostility, their bad attitudes, their hatred towards God's people, and all of what God wanted to be done. The Edomites hated it, and so did the other heathen nations. They hated it. So, let's see here. Keep going. So, verse 11 picks up with it, and it continues on. It says, "But the cormorant and the bittern shall possess it. The owl also and the raven shall dwell in it. And he shall stretch out upon it a line of confusion and stones of emptiness." And it says in verse 12, "And they shall call the nobles therein to the kingdom, but none shall be there. and all her princes shall be nothing. We just read a verse a little bit ago, and I think it was Mark who read it in Jeremiah. But it talked about one of the punishments that was going to happen for this land was it was going to be desolate. It was going to be left to the wild beasts. So when we look at this, you know, the cormorant and the bittern. So I'm not exactly a scholar when it comes to animals, but when I first read through this, I kind of skimmed through it, not really realizing these were animals. So would anyone want to guess what kind of animals we're talking about here?
Our Bible's got pelican and porcupine.
Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, that's the cormorant. When you look up the translation in the interlinear, it does say pelican for the cormorant. But the bittern is what got me confused, because it mentions a bird in the interlinear, but when I look it up in other places, it does talk about a porcupine or a hedgehog. So surely it's not a flying hedgehog. But everything else is birds.
Well, Shannon said porcupine would be tree bark, so that was you.
So maybe it's a type of bird that we just still don't understand what it is. But yeah, you're right. So these are birds that are going to now inhabit this place. There was going to be confusion and stones of emptiness. And then in verse 12, it's talking about their kings, their nobles, their princes. They're not going to be there. None shall be there. And uninhabited, desolate, just like Jeremiah talked about. Thorns shall come up in her palaces, nettles and brambles in the fortresses thereof. It shall be a habitation of dragons and a court for owls. The wild beasts of the desert shall also meet with the wild beasts of the island. And the satyr shall cry to his fellow, the screech owl also shall rest there, and find for herself a place of rest. And shall the great owl make her nest, and lay and hatch, gather under her shadow. There shall be the vultures also be gathered, every one with her mate. So nobody's going to be living there by the time this judgment's over with. And just like you said, Clark, you take some of these animals that are being discussed. I mean, the vultures here in verse 15. Think about all the dead carcasses that we just talked about. They're going to be there eating these dead carcasses. There's not going to be any people living here. This is going to be for the wild beasts, basically coming in to eat all these dead people that were slain and killed. Yeah, they're going to have their bones. So, this is way off topic, but, you know, me and Penny often talk about the vultures and really their purpose being served of eating these dead animals. I mean, God had these major judgments take place where all these dead bodies were going to be laid around. And He has wild beasts that He created that's going to come in and clean up all that mess. It was going to be so many bodies, they weren't going to sit there and dig a grave for everybody. The animals were going to take care of this. And that's the picture being talked about. All right, we'll finish this chapter out. And at the end of it here, it says, seek ye the book of the Lord. So seek ye the book of the Lord, and read, no one of these shall fail, none shall want her mate, for my mouth hath commanded, and his spirit it hath gathered them. And in verse 17 it says, and he hath cast the lot for them, and his hand hath divided it unto them by line. They shall possess it forever. And then here we go. From generation to generation, they shall dwell therein. We have this great judgment taking place on the disobedient. You know, this message from generation to generation, this message is going to be documented, it's going to be written down, so that future generations are going to be able to read this and realize you do not go against the wrath of God. You must be obedient to God or you will face the consequences, just like these people faced. And that should have been a sign and a warning for all the generations moving forward. Don't go against God. So, I don't think I had any other notes here. I did start down the path of studying when the final destruction was on Edom. And I've got to dig a little deeper. But it looked like the ultimate destruction of that whole nation took place around the same time as the destruction of Jerusalem in AD 70. So I would encourage everyone as we end this chapter, do some history homework and see what you come up with on when Edom was finally wiped out as a nation. So at this point, I didn't really leave any time for questions, but at this point we'll go ahead and say class is over and we'll get ready for worship.